Okay to go, Winston.
Thank you. Will Godfrey just enter? Okay, welcome every councillor here and on the officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny panel. I've just got a little thing to say about the COVID situation, that due to the ongoing COVID situation, a desire to retain a level of social distancing at council meetings at this time, we're holding the meeting virtually. Hopefully this will be the last one that will be held virtually, but we'll wait and see. We'll review this approach for any future meetings in line with government and health guidance at that time. So first off, Michaela, over to you. Any apologies for absence and substitutions?
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Karen Warrington and apologies from Councillor Andy Furs.
And no substitutions?
No.
Right. Members, any declarations of interest that we should note appertaining particularly for this meeting? I can't see any. Right. Urgent business agreed by the chair. Well, I'm stepping in at fairly short notice for Councillor Warrington. Nothing that's been agreed by me, and I spoke to her this morning. Nothing was on her radar to be urgently discussed. So we'll move on from there. And we'll go straight to the public statements. Now, Catherine Howells, are you on the call? I think you've entered the room, Catherine.
Hi,
you are there.
Hi,
you are there. Great. Okay. Well, look, you've got 3 minutes, and Michaela's going to time keep. So okay. You'll hear Michaela saying after about 2.5 minutes, you've got 30 seconds left, just in case, right. You know that. So it's a slight irritation when she interrupts, but she needs to do that from a sort of procedural point of view. So whenever you're ready, Catherine, very nice to see you, and you start your 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, and thank you to the panel for the opportunity to speak to you today ahead of your budget discussions. And I wanted to speak to you today about the proposed parking charges for South Street in Midsummer Norton. Midsummer Norton is a busy market town which serves not only its local residents, but also the surrounding villages and hamlets. It's an important hub for friends and family, and as well as this, provides essential services for local people, such as the post office, the banks, the pharmacies, and a variety of shops. It's also an important focal point for our community. While many people arrive into the town centre on foot or by bus, for others this isn't possible, either because of their circumstances or because of their location. And for these people, the free car park gives them a reason to visit our town and not to take their custom elsewhere, to online or to the big supermarkets. I appreciate that a local authority has to raise money to spend money, but I believe that introducing these parking charges will be counterproductive to maintaining the council budget for the following reasons. There will inevitably be a reduction in footfall to the high street, which will result in a loss of revenue for local shops. As you well know, many shops are struggling to stay afloat due to the pandemic and other reasons, and some have already had to close their shutters because they couldn't make the finances work. Shop closures don't only impact local residents, but they also hit the council's coffers. The fewer shops we have, the fewer visitors we'll get, and the cycle will spiral downwards. Secondly, a reduction in footfall to our local post offices and banks may result in us losing these essential services if they become uneconomical to maintain. This would have a huge impact on our elderly community and others who struggle to get to one of the nearby cities. It has been suggested, thirdly, that the free parking encourages people to park all day in order to use the bus services to go into Bath or Bristol. No doubt some of these people will still see a modest charge as preferable to paying for parking in the city or driving further to a park and ride, but others will simply look to park further out in residential streets, and this will disadvantage local residents who may then be unable to park close to their own homes for days at a time. Finally, taking the above into account, I believe the proposals would be unlikely to generate the revenue anticipated, which I believe could result in the scheme making a loss once the costs of enforcing the parking charges are taken into account. So for those reasons, I would urge the panel to examine these proposals carefully and to encourage the Cabinet to reconsider. I think it would be bad for the budget overall and bad for Midsummer Norton, for our local businesses and for our residents. Thanks again. You haven't had to give me the time warning.
Right.
So thank you very much.
Very clear, Catherine. Now, we do actually have an opportunity, if members have any questions, to ask you factual questions. And sometimes, not in this committee, but in others, people stray off the factual question path. But I'll just ask members, is there anything that you would like to ask Catherine as a point of clarification, as a factual question? I can't see any. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Firstly, thank you very much. I think you've made all the points that needed to be made very clearly. I would just ask, are you aware of any type of consultation on this from the council in the past?
I haven't. We are about to be joined by some more small local residents, I think, into my room here. No, I'm not aware of any consultation. No.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other factual questions? Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Catherine. I just wondered about your last statement that you felt that the cost of enforcement might outweigh the income. Have you got any more figures or a kind of basis for that, or is it an impression?
It's simply an impression. I'm thinking about the cost of having a parking warden. I know that the figures that I've seen were that it anticipated raising around £20,000, and that's what I saw on the paperwork. And I don't know whether that £20,000 is revenue or profit. But if it was, for example, the profit, I imagine that could soon disappear. And I wonder, and this is, I suppose, my request to you all as the scrutiny panel, to look at whether the figures would add up. And my concern would be that if we charged the people who currently park there and based figures on that, are we taking into account the number of people who would be put off by the charges and who would look for alternative options? And has that been taken into account when it's when the figures have been looked at? But I don't have the figures beyond that 20,000.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. There don't seem to be any more questions. I suspect this is going to come up in the presentation, and I'm sure Councillor Hughes will have a say in asking some questions about it. So we recognise your statement and also your request. Your request was that we may want to talk and ask Cabinet to reconsider this decision. So I'm very conscious of that, and we'll see how the meeting goes on about this particular subject. It's obviously gathered a lot of momentum already. So thank you very much indeed, Catherine, for that contribution. And
thank you. Thanks for your time.
You're very much welcome. Right, just moving on. Item 6 is the minutes of the last meeting. They have been circulated. So may I confirm these as a correct record? If you're okay with them, if members could stick your hands basically up like that. Okay, I don't think Councillor McPhee, are you okay? Or yep, you're okay. Right, well, in that case, Michaela, is that satisfactory for you that everyone's on board? Jolly good. Right, let's move to item 7, the Cabinet member update. So this is where I invite Councillor Samuel, before we get into the budget presentation, if there's anything he needs to update us on outside of the budget, he feels that he needs to or he wants to update us. So Councillor Samuel, is there anything outside of the budget presentation you need to update us on?
Well, only what has been happening on the City Region's Sustainable Transport Strategy, which I think settlement, which has already, I think, been through the Climate Emergency Panel. I mean, it's obviously involved quite a lot of Cabinet discussion, as you probably know yourself, and negotiation with WECA in terms of the details. So that there is also a little interface which I've been trying to get a resolution on and a firmer plan on, which relates to Bath Quays, because the programme for Bath Quays this year is quite a challenging programme, but there is a need to bring together a number of different funding streams, including the City Region funding, so that we actually achieve a scheme on the ground that makes the bridge open, but with the connections on both sides, the building work on both sides completed, and all of this coming together probably between July and November this year. So I've been spending quite a bit of time on that with the officers to just make sure that we're on track for that, which I'm hoping we are. I think the tender has now, the invitation to tender has now been issued. Work is proceeding with the bridge naming and how that's going to be done. The construction on the Bath Quay south side is progressing well, and the public realm works will be starting in a few months. So all of that coming together. The only other thing I just highlight is the work that has been coming to conclusion on a number of things, actually. The 4 local high streets projects, so that's Southdown, Twerton, Weston and Moorland Road, together with the, which is very similar to the Keynsham and Midsummer Norton schemes. So quite a lot of work going on that, and we're in the final stages now of the Milsom Quarter master plan work. And a lot of these things are heading towards the WECA committee in April hopefully for approval. So the team have got an enormous amount of work on with multi-million-pound price tags behind them. So that's the kind of thing, that's what I've mostly been spending the economic development part of my portfolio on this month. I'm quite happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions for Councillor Samuel? Now, I think we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Councillor Samuel, that you're hard at work on the economic portfolio. So thanks for that. Just before I ask you to introduce the budget and hand over to Andy, I just want to outline the batting order. Sorry to use the cricket analogy. So I'll ask that. But we've also got on the call Councillor Karen Walker, who's the chair of the Climate Emergency and Sustainability PDS panel. And she's going to outline the views that were expressed in her panel about the budget. So we'll get Andy, yourself and Andy, to do the presentation, and maybe Gary also. Then we'll invite Councillor Walker, and then I'll invite members to ask questions. So that's the sort of sequencing that we'll do. So without further ado, Councillor Samuel, over to you to give us an introduction to the budget.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, since we last came to the panel at the beginning of January, we've been refining the numbers, the projects within the various appendices that will sit within the budget, and bringing the whole thing together really with the most accurate figures that we've got. I'm pleased to say really that the verification work we've been doing over the last month is not showing us any significant change to the numbers that you would have had before. And I think you've got some of the detail now of what will be in those appendices. And so we're happy to take some questions on that. The overall position has not particularly changed. The pressure on the council's income is projected to be pretty well the same as we thought earlier in the month. It's interesting actually, just to diverge from that for a moment, but to comment that when you receive the footfall figures for Bath in particular, I don't actually have them for Keynsham and Midsummer Norton because they're not collected in that way. But footfall figures for Bath have been extremely low in January. And the reasons for that are still being looked at. But it does show the pressure there is on the sort of local high streets retailing. But of course, that also feeds into the Roman baths. And it also feeds into lack of confidence in the commercial sector about making investments. So we're hoping that the February figures will show an improvement, but certainly there's been a big dip in footfall in Bath City over the last month. Although I noticed at the weekend I was in the town, it was very, very busy indeed. So I think there is something going on there that we need to look at. But it just emphasises the point that the council does need the income from its commercial estate and its heritage estate. and that is going to remain depressed this year. And we have made a lot of provision for that this year. We are expecting that, and of course that's where a lot of things flow in this budget. So that's all I kind of want to say by way of introduction. We're still listening to representations we've had. We've just pulling together the work from the public consultation on the budget. Had some good information there that we will receive at the cabinet, and you know, we'll welcome the panel's recommendations when we get them. So I think that's over to you, Andy, to kind of pick up from there.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Chair, I'm also going to invite Will Godfrey just to give a few words in terms of how the budget and what's going on in the organisation kind of join up as well. So I think that gives a good bit of context before I dive into a bit of the numbers for the panel.
Always good to hear from the Chief Executive. Very welcome, Will.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Andy. So yeah, I guess I just want to start off by a couple of reflections, and then a couple of sort of issues for me that I guess it's just important for people to understand and reflect on. So, you know, the background for me is, you know, we've been through 18 months, 2 years of probably the most difficult financial position this local authority will ever have faced, and we're still addressing that. But I actually believe that because of the action that was taken early on in 2020, we're now beginning to see that, you know, the foundations that we're having to rebuild, I think, are pretty strong compared with where many local authorities are, and that's a huge credit to, you know, to Andy and his team in particular, but also colleagues across the organisation for the way that actually the organisation responded to the challenge that we've got. And you know, because we got to grips with the recovery of it pretty early on, you know, we've been able to work with administration to, you know, to create a set of budget proposals which, from my perspective, deliver the job of officers ultimately is to deliver the corporate strategy that's agreed and to deliver the, you know, the priorities set out by the administration. And I believe that based on the work that we've done over a period of time as officers, we've been able to fulfil our responsibility and our roles both to the administration, but also broader to the whole council and to the communities of Bath, North East Somerset, in the sense that actually, you know, we are re-establishing some sound financial foundations. Now, in terms of the specifics for 22-23, there are some real challenges that are within this budget, particularly around modernising the organisation. So, you know, a lot of the commitment around transformation programmes that is really important to get better outcomes for individuals and communities, and you will see some fairly significant investment around there. But you'll also see that, you know, we are looking at how we improve outcomes, so particularly around issues of adult social care, children's social care, you know, protecting the amount of money that is committed to those areas, but also, you know, to really think about how we can change and improve the way that those services are delivered to secure the outcomes that actually, you know, that people need and want, etc. And I guess the other thing I want to say is that there's a huge amount of activity that sits behind these numbers. So both in terms of the revenue budget, but also in terms of the capital programme, it's easy in some ways just to look at the numbers. The most challenging to a degree is actually then to reflect on the activity that has to take place behind the numbers to deliver the outcomes. And as ever, you know, I think for an organisation of our scale, you know, there's an enormous amount of activity that sits behind what we're seeking to do and what the budget sets out. And, you know, inevitably, there'll be some challenges as we go through the next 12 months in terms of delivery of that. But, you know, my job, along with officers, is to work with administration and to focus on, you know, the corporate strategy, like I say, you know, the overarching a vision of improving people's lives and making sure that actually we've got some sound financial foundations upon which to deliver that. And I think as Andy talks you through the detail, you'll see that actually we are, I think, in a pretty good position to be delivering the priorities that have been set out and the activity that sits behind that. So, Andy, with that, I'll hand back over to you.
Okay. Well, so just to really sort of kick off the report in terms of the papers that the panel have, you've got pretty much the majority of the budget report that is being and has been finalised for Cabinet. But what I was really keen to do is make sure that the corporate panel had pretty much a complete picture in terms of the main report and then the key annexes. So the savings and income annex, the funding requirement annex, our capital investment, so that's new capital investment, and also the quality impact assessments. So that's really kind of some of the core elements of the budget papers, and then the additional papers they're now being finalised and will be published for the Cabinet and Council meetings. But to really sort of walk through, I think what's kind of the backbone of the report is to really highlight some of the points that Will said around our 5-year financial strategy. We're now kind of in year 2. The strategy hasn't fundamentally changed. It has been heavily informed by COVID and what that's done to the council's income. And for me, it's really key to keep that strategy in terms of transitioning through a significantly high risk financial period in terms of our risk exposure on income, whilst combating some of those organisational challenges around making sure the corporate strategy stays on track and is implemented and respond to what's happening economically, also in terms of inflation risk. All of those components do feed through the numbers in the report, and there's key points that I'll refer to as I go through some of the highlight points that I want to bring the panel to the panel's attention. So I think just starting on the numbers, the net budget requirement for the council is 126.74 million. Now, that figure is our net figure. It's that's net of external income. So our income from parking, room and baths, ticket sales and other fees and charges, and income from our commercial estate, that's net of all of that income. That's a significant amount of income we need to run our services. That income is still at risk and it has been reduced from around the 50 million mark. It's now a much lower figure. That's been reflected in our numbers. In terms of movement in net budget, also want to make sure that that's sort of touched on, because our net budget requirement has gone up, and that's in recognition of some of the inflation risks that we face, and also labour inflation and service demands in terms of cost of social care. We've put in additional funding requirements for areas like recycling. Lots of our services, just at an operational level, are costing a lot, and then there's risk exposure with inflation also. So we have got growth in net budget of around 6 million. There is a presentational point to be aware of in the numbers, that our actual sort of, when we analyse 1 year's net budget to the other, has moved from 130 million to 136 million. But then we have a netting down of the budget, which is our business rates retention. That gets paid to us by government as a grant reimbursement. So that's really a presentational thing in the numbers. That's where we're reclaiming money where we grant business rates relief. So the kind of the core movement in net budget is going from 130 million to 136 million. And then we've got that income reimbursement that takes it down to the 126 mil. So that's kind of the high level numbers in terms of revenue. I think a few areas in the report are really useful to refer to also. In section 5.2, we've got an analysis of budget movement by portfolio. So that shows the start position, which I've just talked through, which was the 130 million, and how it's been built up to the 136 million. So that shows the summary of savings and income, and then the funding requirement at a portfolio level. You'll see quite large adjustments on economic development and resources. The reason for that is that we're holding a number of the council-wide contingencies on those budget lines, because pay inflation, we put that into just one line in that budget until we go through the pay negotiation settlement, and then that'll be issued out across all services. And also our inflation contingency that we put in, and corporate contingency for social care is held in that line. They are budget lines that will be allocated out to some of the other portfolios once the budget's approved. So couple of the key numbers just to build on from what Bill was saying around key challenges, and also Richard. The increase in funding requirement to the council is 18 million. That is pretty significant. That's an analysis of what it's costing to run the council now, then forward assessments on key demands on services and key areas of priority investment, plus overlaying areas of risk such as inflation. The report touches on some of the headlines. So put in an inflation contingency, a 2 million social care contingency, and also recognising we have pressures on home to school transport, and then we have to recognise some of the rising costs in pay. So we put a pay contingency in also on top of the 2% we've added. So they're all key contingencies because there is, as I said, a high degree of sort of risk exposure in terms of rising costs. So that has been recognised in the budget. I think in terms of financing the budget, before I get into the detail on the savings, I just want to sort of touch on how our funding's changed from one year to the other. So the spending review and the provisional settlement has brought additional grant funding. When we analyse last year compared to this year, we are up by 3 million, and that is positive because that has helped fund core council services and reduced down our savings requirements by 3 mil. However, that does sort of kind of not fully recognise some of the immediate challenges around our income exposure, because what that doesn't include is any COVID grants for income reimbursement. From 22-23, the kind of government support drops out completely, and we still do have risks on reduced income. Just to highlight that point, in year, the 21-22 budget in the first quarter has been reimbursed for 4 million income loss through sales fees and charges claims to government. That reimbursement drops out next year. So the 3 million increase is net increase. We're not getting any more grants or planning for any more. The budget will be balanced on that figure, and no assumptions around income reimbursement. So our savings total 11.87 million. That's really how we address the gap in the budget after all funding, and we address the growth needs. We've got a few key areas in there in terms of significant reprofiling of income. This is part of our strategy. So parking is being rebased in line with current performance, and also in line with our charging strategy, because that is an income area that has been depressed following COVID, and the intention of our strategy is to bring that back up to pre-pandemic levels. Those adjustments flow through in the budget, so there's a big increase in parking income. Across all the portfolios, we have an ambitious and rigorously tested savings plan. And also we've looked at other areas of income, so key areas building back our commercial estate income. That was heavily impacted by COVID, so current rents are performing a lot lower than pre-pandemic levels, so our income has been heavily depressed in that area. But our strategy for getting areas of the commercial estates refurbished and out on the market quicker, and also looking at diversifying income, so creating less reliance on retail, that strategy and target has been fed into the budget with a 1 million increase. I think they're probably some of the main sort of detail points in terms of funding requirement and savings. I've touched on some of the contingencies. I think probably the other key things to note is our consultations being more extensive this year, in terms of we had the session in January to really go through the initial detail with Scrutiny. We've had the Scrutiny sessions with the other panels, and now we're finalising this one. Prior to that, we had the budget webinar, and throughout that period, we've had feedback through our web forms. So we've had a number of comments on all of our proposals. They've now been reviewed and are being distilled down into an annex that will feature in the cabinet report. So that's a key element where we've built on previous practice and made sure we've carried out a high degree of engagement. I think probably the final notes I wanted to raise is that the capital annex shows all of the new additional capital that's going into our programme, and that has £31 million of investment in 22-23, and over the 5 years, it's 69 million. So, Chair, I think they're the headlines that we want to cover. So I'll hand back to you if that's okay.
Yep. Thanks very much. Councillor Walker, I think I'll invite you at this stage if you just want to update us on what you feel is the relevant interest of the Climate Emergency and Sustainable PDS panel. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon. So I really just wanted to emphasise on some of the comments that came from my panel on the 17th of January. So basically saying this was an unrealistic budget and it would have further cost being put on residents. Again, I've heard what you said today. We've had a bad 2 years with income generation, and also you have to respect that some of these residents, again, have lost income from work as well. So that was the, and a bit more of a transparency in the papers. So again, there was concerns of garden waste, as this service has not always been delivered. Again, car parking charges in Midsom Norton and Radstock would have a catastrophic effect on the high street. Just touching on that, if parking services, I see that you've got some savings there. Now, if we have more parking enforcement actually going to cars that park on double yellow lines throughout our authority, we'd most probably make some income actually. So I just wanted to make a point on that. So again, there's some savings on street lighting, and there was a motion that was moved at council for women's safety. So again, that they've raised that. That's not a great savings really for street lighting to go off. So again, we know that we've had some staffing issues within our climate emergency team, and we'd like some reassurance that that's going to be dealt with, so we can have our reports to our panel coming further in the year. So again, there was regards to a dog warden, but I realise I've seen now that that's not going to be any savings on that either. So that was just the points I really wanted to raise from my panel on the 17th of January.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon.
If you want to stay, you're very welcome. If you want to leave, because you've got a lot of stuff on, I know, that's your decision. You're always very welcome to stay if you want to.
No, I will leave, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Andy, any immediate response to that, or you're aware of those points because you attended the meeting, presumably?
The points have been fed back, and yeah, I think most of them have probably been addressed in the budget proposal.
Okay. Right, well, at this point then, I think I'll invite members to raise the points that they want to. So any member particularly want to kick off? Kick off means start, by the way, rather than any other interpretation of kick off. So let's see, anyone coming up first? Councillor McPhee. You're on mute.
That's all right. I'm under now. On page 24 of the package, I think it's the very end of 5.2, in the paragraph you say it highlights that pre-COVID there has been a reliance on external commercial income to fund the council's base budget. And to manage this over the short and medium term, there will need to be a rebalance found between appropriate council tax increases alongside ensuring sustainable commercial income. Well, I had two questions there. What does that actually really mean? But how big are these sums that we're talking? And I say that because lower down, you show that in terms of council tax, we're the third lowest. And if I understand this properly, what you're saying is you're going to reduce the expenditure even more because you want to not have commercial income funding it.
Should I start there, Andy? Well, I mean, it's just a fact of life that over many, many years, the council has been fortunate enough to have strong external sources of income. So what that means is income that is not dependent on government decisions. So the money that we generate from our heritage estate, principally the pump rooms and room baths, the large commercial estate which the council operates, which many local authorities don't have, and the high numbers of visitors that come to Bath in particular, who generate a lot of parking income. So many councils don't have those three income streams and are reliant on government grants or other means of government support alone. The downside of that is that the council has got used to having that income over many, many years, over many administrations, and has scaled its spending up to those normal levels of income, you know, within a bit of tolerance, because things sometimes go up and down a bit. What the pandemic did was to cruelly cut those income sources overnight, and that is what's caused the problem. And as Andy Rothery said, we've had some compensation during 2020 and for 3 months in 2021, 21-2 financial year, but that's dropped away now. The government has cut its support scheme for local authorities. And so the problem we're wrestling with is you cannot simply cut out the use of the external sources of income without having a devastating effect on the services the council runs, many of which are statutory services, particularly where they relate to adults and children. Many are important things for residents, such as the waste and recycling collection, the street cleaning, all the stuff we do to our highways and transport. And that's the problem that we've been wrestling with and will continue to wrestle with over the next few years till we get back to a stable level of external income. And bear in mind, this council now receives virtually no revenue support grant from central government. There was a time when, like all councils, we received revenue support grant, which basically makes up the gap between spending and activity. And that doesn't exist anymore in any meaningful sense. So we're having to wrestle with the transition whilst this income is depressed. And I think our expectation is that the income levels will not return to pre-pandemic levels quite probably for another 3 years, 3 financial years. So you're into 25, 26. And that's the reality. And if you look at the income loss, I haven't added it up actually, but if you look at the income loss over the 5-year period from 2020 to 2025, it will be many, many millions of pounds the council has lost. So that's the mathematical conundrum we're wrestling with. But of course, at the bottom of it all are real services to real people who need those services. So I don't know if that, Andy, I don't know if you want to add to that, but from my perspective, that's the kind of issue.
Yeah, no, that's you covered all the key points, Richard. I think the only things to add is in the report, so the council tax average banding is one graphical representation. There's also the graph on core spending power. So that picks up a couple of Richard's points where you add together our tax-based income, council tax and business rates, and also our government grants, and analyse yourself at a population level. So that shows an analysis compared to our neighbours. So that sort of does marry up quite nicely with the council tax, which shows that we are much lower in the funding spectrum than many other councils. The reason for that is because we have performed extremely well with commercial income. So the quantum and risk exposure is large at the moment, and that's really part of the 5-year view for our strategy. I think the adjustments we did in the in-year 21-22 budget was around 13 million to take down our income expectation, because we do need to be completely realistic when we plan our funding of the council and how we navigate that transition. So I think for me that is the sort of the key point in that statement, which is how we go through a transition period over 5 years to not create over-reliance on commercial income, because if it comes back, that's really positive, but over-reliance is also a risk. So that's the transition to have not too much over-reliance on commercial income from areas such as parking and the heritage services.
Yeah. So we're talking of like 15 million maybe of money that you over the 5 years want to take out of being funded by commercial income.
Yeah, it doubles up over the 5 years. So because there's, let's say we start and we're 13 million down, and then we're 10 million down, you get up to 23 million. So it does, as Councillor Samuel said, the sums are significant over the 5 years. They go into the tens of millions.
Right. Thank you. May I have one more?
Can I come back to you a bit later, Hal? I just want to get Councillor Sally Davis in next.
Thank you. And just a bit of context for some people who may not be aware that although I've been doing planning now for 7 years, for 8 years before that, I chaired the Children and Young People's panel. So I have a reasonable background in understanding some of their budget. And I just wonder how confident we are of the savings that are on there. I notice what the Chief Exec has said, but the cost of reconfiguration of the foster services, we're often looking at how we can get more in-house services, or the services run more in-house, because it is cheaper and it is more effective, and our people are really good than when we have to use agencies. And the home to school transport, I can't tell you how many home to school transport working parties and investigations I've probably done over the years I've been on the council. But they are, as Richard said, we have got to do these statutory things that we're talking about, but how confident you are of the savings that are there, because they are quite large. And I just, wonder how confident. I can see the panel that looked at this asked a similar question, but it does concern me because they are quite big savings in areas that take up a huge amount of the money we have. So it's just a query on that. Thank you.
Andy, I can just make a general comment because you can come in on the detail. One of the things, and I think we've got better year on year on this, one of the things, Sally, that I've been quite keen to do, it's all very well to pencil savings into a budget, but actually achieving them is the important thing. And I haven't got this year's outturn figures yet because we're not quite there as to how we've done this year. But both Will Godfrey and Andy will know that delivering on savings when you've identified them is not something you can leave to chance. So right from the beginning of the process, going way back into last year, we've been very rigorous really as to whether savings are achievable and how they're verified and what's involved in doing them. And probably that's the moment to pass to you, Andy. But I think year on year, our performance about achieving savings has got better. I don't think we're at 100% yet. We probably never will be, but I think we have improved a lot as an organisation.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And Councillor Davis, in terms of in my section 151 officer capacity, kind of oversight and challenge on the savings, I am confident they've been through a really rigorous process. Our Director of Children's Services has put these proposals together, backed with her own service transformation plan. That's something that's been worked up in significant detail. So the proposals around children's services are linked to key priorities in terms of service planning, and that is something that's been mapped out over a number of years, and also in terms of our internal assurance before anything makes it to any of the budget proposal. We've had a pretty rigorous internal challenge session, so we are sort of making sure what ends up in the budget are things that have been through a significant sort of checks and balances process.
Thank you. I mean, I know it's difficult because one particular family could come into the system and can make a huge difference on our budget, but we don't know what's in the pipeline. We don't know what's like to come forward with things like that. But thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Well, I don't think you'll be surprised that that I'm concerned about the subject of car parking charges again. So just following on from our previous conversation at the previous meeting, I mean, first of all, I'd say that the views of our speaker, Catherine, that certainly reflects the opinion over here from thousands of residents So I'm not going to go over all the points that Catherine made, because I think she made them very well. But it's important to understand that over here, in the sort of rural or semi-rural areas, I mean, the car is quite often the only viable option. It's a necessity, not a luxury. And a lot of people use cars to get to work because there is no other viable option for them. And at a time where we're seeing increases in costs, running costs and living costs, to add this on top of that is a burden on some of our lowest paid workers. I would also point out that the regeneration of our high street is at probably quite a volatile stage. And this also, I mean, we have this climate emergency ambition to encourage more use of local facilities and local shops and banks and pharmacies. And again, this as with most areas that this will cover, this will cause more harm than good. We've established that we were told at the previous meeting that the public consultation had occurred. Now, obviously, that we've now established that hasn't happened. So before we can go any further, there needs to be a public consultation before we can even get to the stage of a TRO. So I would ask that, is it right that this should remain in a budget where we haven't actually done the consultation with the public yet? Because by leaving this in the budget, we're saying that the public consultation is a foregone conclusion, and it's just a box ticking exercise. So really, we need to establish from that consultation the needs of the residents of Midsummer Norton before we start putting it into budgets. I think, lastly, I think at the last meeting I was challenged on if we weren't going to raise money from the car park, where else would we find the money? Well, I've had a look and I see that we're planning to spend £500,000 to develop a business case and secure funding for a collection study centre for Bath's Fashion Museum. I'm not saying that's not a worthy cause, but I'm saying that I think protecting a vital community facility should be a higher priority than a fashion museum that, from what I can see, for the last 5 years, loses money every year. So I'm just wondering where we are now with I mean, this isn't just Midsummer Norton car park, this is Radstock car park as well.
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes.
Well, I think, Sean, what I'd say at this stage, everything in the budget, and that is everything, including savings proposals, is draft. So that's the purpose of publishing a draft budget with as much detail as we can, to gauge public reaction, to assess acceptability of proposals, whatever they are, whether they are to raise more income or cut services or anything at all in the budget. So we're still at that stage. The decision point will be the Cabinet meeting on the 10th, when the Cabinet will decide what it wishes to recommend to Council the week after. And so, we're still taking views. The official public consultation has closed now, and this panel is probably the last point in that process. So, nothing is final until it's final, is what I'd say. The other thing I just wanted to comment on, your reference to the 500,000 for the Fashion Museum, that sits in the capital budget, and you can't mix the capital budget with the revenue budget. So I'm afraid I can't take money from that to fund a revenue proposal. But I just wanted to comment a bit on that, because I know people have raised eyes on that, but I'll just give you some of the background behind that, because I think it's worth recording. We will be seeking resources to implement the Fashion Museum project from the West of England Combined Authority. We don't get anything out of the Combined Authority unless we prove the economic case for doing it. So in that particular instance, there's two components to the Fashion Museum project. One is that when we leave the assembly rooms next year, as we are now required to do by the National Trust, we will have to find somewhere to house the 100,000 items of the collection, which are, my understanding, it's in the top 10 collections nationally at least. And so that's got to be housed somewhere in properly temperature control conditions. So we need somewhere to house the collection, but we also need somewhere to show it. And the area that we have identified is within the central area in Bath. And there are two parts ultimately to this proposal. One is to develop the collection centre, and we need the money to take the case to quite an advanced level in terms of planning design, building design. It's probably going to be a partnership project with Bath Spa University, so there's quite a lot of complexities around that. And that's what the resources are for, is to enable us to do that and bring it up to full planning application standard. So that itself will produce quite a significant economic benefit in the long term to the central area in Bath, and it hopefully will act as an anchor to many of the areas in the north of the city where the retail sector has been in decline. So I'm sorry, that's a slightly long-winded answer, but that money should be viewed as the necessary first stage pump priming for what will be a major capital project in the years to come. I mean, the Fashion Museum won't be built by this administration within the next financial year. It's a much longer term project, but that's the kind of background to it. And I think it's important to think about it in that context.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the clarification. And I'm pleased to hear that that the car park issue is still under review and it hasn't actually been confirmed yet. Thank you.
Could I just ask for clarification? I'm trying to find the numbers. What is the quantum? How much are we talking about in the income, the net income that we would raise on the Midsummer Norton Radstock car parking? Do we know that number?
Even 22-23, it's £20,000, and I think there's a further £50,000 in 23-24. That's net.
Okay, I'm conscious that our speaker, Catherine Howells, did actually make a request and the request of us that we make a request to Cabinet. And I'm just, Michaela, I don't know if you could give me a little bit of guidance. I mean, Councillor Hughes, do you think we should be making a more formal request of Cabinet to reconsider this and take note of what's been said today? How would you feel?
Absolutely. I think certainly within our findings, we should be putting that proposal forwards before the budget is finalised. I would also point out that, you know, you've got a £20,000 figure in the 22-23 budget. However, by the time you've completed a public consultation and a TRO, I think you're unlikely to see that number within a financial year.
Well, I would be quite happy as chair that if we had a form of words that went back asking for Cabinet to specifically reconsider the parking charges in Midsummer Norton and Radstock. Would that be acceptable, Councillor Hughes?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Michaela, can we come up with a form of words that would be within our statutory responsibility of being able to request Cabinet to reconsider this decision in the light of the Speaker and Councillor Hughes's comments as well? But, you know, the Speaker who articulated very well the case, I thought. And I think, you know, Councillor Samuel has as well, and certainly wearing my West of England Combined Authority Scrutiny hat, we are trying to encourage shopping locally. We are very aware of Midsummer Norton and Radstock. So I would add my voice to Councillor Hughes and the Speaker, Catherine Howells, to asking this to be reconsidered by Cabinet at their meeting. Yes, Michaela.
Yeah, just to say that the minutes, so the notes of the whole debate of this will go to the Cabinet members before their meeting. But what you can do is have specific bullet points at the end that you wish for them to have a look at. I would need to know whether that's the whole panel or just some members of it. So I just need to check that.
Yeah, how do other members feel? I mean, are they similar to myself and Councillor Hughes? Councillor Singleton is saying yes. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Davis. Councillor McPhee, is that acquiescence or what? You're on me. We can't hear you. Hal, you're on mute.
Okay.
Yes, we didn't hear you.
Yeah, I'll just put a counter view. Keynsham is 20,000 people, and we're a typical town in northeast Somerset. I believe our income contribution is £300,000 with our parking. So it's quite a big difference, and I understand the Summer Valley is over 40,000. So that's 1/4 of our electorate not paying any car parking charges at all. It's a surprise to me.
But sorry, I would just point out that there are some stark differences between Keynsham and Midsummer Norton, but let's not forget that there is also a car park in Midsummer Norton that the council do own, and they lease it to Sainsbury. So they already do receive an income from parking in Midsummer Norton.
Okay, well, I think we won't dwell on this, but there's enough. Councillor McPhee's point is well made and noted, but with the rest of the committee, I think there is a feeling that this we need to put a formal words together, Michaela, that reinforces the point made that we would like Cabinet to reconsider this. Good, excellent. Moving on, Councillor Hughes, are you okay for the moment? You may come back on a latter point. Okay, Councillor Hodge.
Hello everyone, thank you. I've one point on detail that I don't understand to ask Andy again, and a couple of other points on the savings and fund areas to be funded. So thank you very much, Andy, and your officers for all the questions that you have answered so far, especially the BISRIS rate relief adjustment, which I really find difficult to understand, but I've got it. I think I understand it now. I just wanted to ask, one area in the webinar that you presented as a savings area was realigning the borrowing requirement, looking at the capital programme and not borrowing in advance of needs, and identified about 2 million of savings through that process. And I just wondered how that appears in the budget, in the tables we've got in front of us. Was the capital financing of 1.6 million, I thought reflected borrowing, but it's not a great change over the last 3 years. The figures over the last 3 years have been of about that order. So I just wondered, I can give you them if that helps. I think that the capital financing was 2.01 the year before and 1.75 the year before that. So I just wanted to check I was understanding that correctly, where is saving peers. And also the two other points I had is that in terms of increasing funding, new funding went into children and adult services for 4 million, neighbourhood services 1 million, and a smaller amount went into improving customer services. And I just wondered, I thought it'd be interesting to know what that was being spent on. And then an area that I get a lot of questions about, and I think is difficult to understand from the budget funding table, is the park and ride service. And funding has been allocated, the extension and retendering of the contract. And I just wondered if someone could explain that a little bit more, because it's something that park and ride catches people's eyes. They want a more extensive service that's cheaper, and it's quite difficult to understand how that figure is used practically. I think it's more to do with contracts.
Thanks, Councillor Hodge. So on the capital financing, the around the 1.7 to 2 million, that's the annual requirement to fund the new and emerging schemes. So it's kind of linked to new entry capital items, in terms of what went into the 21-22 budget, and then also the 22-23 budget and onwards. So that's funding kind of additionality in capital. Where the saving comes from is almost like the historic programme, where we've gone through that process for a number of years, and then over time, some schemes start to come up with a profile that isn't quite as rapid as originally intended. So what that does is mean we haven't taken out quite as much borrowing as we've needed to. So what that's done, when you put all of those pots of sort of funding together, it has created an underspend. So what we're doing is kind of realigning the programme to make sure we're predicting our actual borrowing requirement in terms of how the capital programme is performing now.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I misunderstood that. Thank you. And
on the, I'm going to jump to the park and ride point, and then could we come back to the other two, because I didn't quite note them down quick enough. So the adjustment on park and ride, it's been a net income generating contract, and it now needs to be rebased because of changes in patronage, basically. So that's what that adjustment's for. Okay.
And really, it was just a positive. I think in the webinar you talked about new funding, and there was some funding going in for improving customer services, but I'm not quite sure. I didn't have the detail on it, but don't worry if you don't have it either.
I'll note. Yeah, I've got that note. I can't answer it now, but I will provide you the detail if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Hughes, can I just skip you and go on to Councillor Elliott, then back to you, just so we've all got all right. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point of clarity, actually. When Councillor Walker was mentioning the points from the climate emergency panel, she mentioned something about street lighting and issues with women's safety. I think we'd all be very concerned if there were any issues around women's safety and the reduction in street lighting. As far as I can see, the item is actually just about kind of some financial engineering. It's about capitalisation of the street lighting projects. Is that right? We're not actually proposing to change anything practically on the ground. It's just a change in the way that the finances are managed.
That's my understanding, Councillor Elliott, but we can provide more detail on it. But I think it's looking at opportunities to look at the maintenance cycle of street lighting and then utilising appropriate capital.
Yeah, okay. So there isn't a plan to reduce the street lighting?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No, okay, thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
I'm just making sure I haven't jumped a queue here. I know Alistair had his name down, and I think Hal was also had a follow-up question.
You carry on, and then I'll go back to Councillor Singleton.
Mine's very quick. It's just a clarification on Appendix 1. There's a note that says it's review of the delivery of library and information service. It says a review of service delivery options for Keynsham and Midsummer Norton libraries, a review of the mobile library service operations, and the relocation of some information services into Bath Central Library. Now, we have asked this week twice now. We've asked the relevant cabinet member and officer to clarify what they mean by this, but we've not received any response. So I'm hoping you might be able to just clarify what that is.
Shall I start? This is a cross-portfolio issue. I have portfolio responsibility for customer services. Councillor Romero has responsibility for libraries. So a good chunk of this is within Dina's portfolio, but there is an interface in relation to the location of an operation of customer services. And the background behind this is that we're post-pandemic, we are looking at quite a lot of customer change in terms of the way people want to interface with the council. And the task we have is to make sure that the services we offer and how people can get to them is now appropriate for the changing needs, because a lot of people have moved their requests for service online or onto the phone, and I think by necessity there was limited face-to-face service available during the lockdown periods of the pandemic. So some habits have changed, and the review really is drawing two things together. And the possibility is being flagged up there of the placement of some services within Bath Central Library, but my understanding is this would be fairly marginal to the operation of the library. It would certainly not be a substantial change that would require a change of planning, for example. But that's the purpose of the review, is to look at that. So there is an overall saving. We did talk about this last week, because the way we've had to present this in the budget figures, I think it all sits in the Children's Services portfolio, doesn't it, Andy? So it was a case of how we present it financially, but probably you can explain that better than I can.
And are you going to, or?
Okay, well, I think Richard's probably covered enough. I can ask colleagues to put this one forward to break it down in a bit more detail, but I've not got the detail in front of me, so I've noted that down as a request.
Sure. I mean, obviously, I don't have any clarification. It's just there is some concern, because obviously relocating some information services into Bath Central Library, again, we're trying to keep people using local facilities, not travelling into Bath to find facilities. And the library is accessed for a lot of services other than just library services. So we're very keen to know more detail about what the intention is there. And I assume Hal would be equally interested in what they're going to do with the Keynsham Library as well. Thank you.
Councillor Singleton, sorry, I messed up my middle order, but over to you now.
That's quite okay. I needed to go down the batting order. Thanks. And obviously huge amounts of work's gone into this, and this is more a comment than a question. And I just have an uneasy feeling, the way things have moved slightly in even the weeks since last we saw this, that both the interest rate issue and the inflation issue may have been under-egged. And the numbers that I see being mentioned don't reflect what I am reading elsewhere in the economy. And I just have a concern about it. And I was really surprised in the risk management report that the Treasury management advisors are advising that borrowing rates are likely to be at the same level in the medium term. Because again, there are signs of interest rates rising in the market at present. And that may be a blip, but it may not be a blip. And I'm sure you've taken it all into consideration, but as I say, I have an uneasy feeling, and I'd be grateful for any comfort you could give me.
It's good observation there, Councillor Singleton. I'll try and give some comfort. I suppose the first comment is, we can't always predict everything, but we do try and be as accurate as possible in terms of identifying risk and making provision. I think probably on the inflation point, whilst we have put in corporate contingencies, these are ones in addition to what's already in our budget assumptions for inflation. So on this point, I'd ask the team, and Gary's also with us, but I have got the numbers in front of me, so I can probably answer this. We have analysed kind of how much funding we put into our contracts in recognition of inflation risk. So because some of it's embedded in the numbers, so you won't see it, but across all of our services we do analyse contracts, and that's part of our contractual uplift. And then we have also recognised areas like home to school transport. So we did an analysis over all of our contracts, and we've got total contract value across the council of around 124 million. When we add up our contingencies that we've put in, and then funding that's gone into core service areas as well, we're putting in around 6.8 million on that. So that's coming out about 5.47%. So I did a check against what inflation's looking like sort of nationally at the moment, and that's landing at around 5.4%. So I'm feeling comfortable that we've got the numbers right on this.
Okay, thank you.
Right, I wouldn't mind just spending maybe 5 minutes on Appendix 1 and going through the really big numbers, because there are some really big numbers in Appendix 1 just on that front sheet. So I just wanted us to be fully aware of what they were. So it's page 35, Andy. I don't know if you've got it up on your screen. Just so I understand the first line, 2 million savings. So this is a sort of fruit salad. It's an amalgam of various things. Reviewing the council's capital borrowing requirements to align with the capital delivery programme. I mean, we have a history of never really delivering everything in the capital delivery programme. So you're just aligning what is necessary to borrow against that. That's what it says, is it?
That's correct. That is, it's really, this is the figure that pulls together the point that Councillor Hodge raised around putting in capital to fund new borrowing requirements, but this is basically the alignment on an assessment of our whole borrowing requirements, our annual payments for borrowing, and then assessing against physically what we're taking out in borrowing to get a much more accurate profile in terms of delivery plan, and we've assessed that we can release 2 million.
Okay, what about the debt rescheduling then? Because I mean, looking at that schedule that we had done in previous meetings, we've got quite a bit of debt, which would, some is, I mean, obviously the short-term debt, treasury management, but there's medium and longer term. And from year to year, you do actually reschedule some of the debt that we've had. Is that all part of this £2 million that you will be rescheduling debt going forward?
Yeah, part of it's in there in terms of interest and debt. I'll ask Gary to join on this question if he's with us, because Gary's worked the numbers on this.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. In terms of debt rescheduling, there was a small element included in the 2 million, but only small, and we do continually kind of look at opportunities which depend on interest rates changes. We were looking at some of our lobos in terms of repaying those early, because rates did go favourable, but in the last couple of months, the kind of short-term rate changes did erode that saving. So at the moment, we're not planning on any, but we do keep the whole portfolio under review for potential options, and we will continue to do so.
And is the source of capital the Public Works Board? Is it, or are there other? Is that the main one, or are there others?
Yeah, for us, our main borrowing would come from the Public Works Link Board. So yeah, just comparing, if you do restructure, at the moment, given where rates are, they're lower than when we did borrow on a lot of our loans, then you would have to pay a premium. So it's just working out, can you do the financial engineering to actually make that pay off? And at the moment, it's not quite working, but as I say, we do continually keep that under review going forward.
Okay. Vacancy turnover factor. Implement a 2% vacancy factor savings across the organisation to account for a year-end turnover. What does that actually mean in reality? That you deliberately have a vacancy rate, that you don't take people on? I'm just concerned that in whatever a normal year constitutes, that may be okay. But with the latest information from the recruitment companies, that 67% of us are probably in the market for a new job, and that well over 20% of us are actively looking for a new job, I'm conscious that there's more churn in the economy at the moment than there has been for some time. And some of this is a build-up of COVID and people having a change of lifestyle, not wanting to commute so much. So is that something that we would normally have, a 2% vacancy? Is that standard? Have we gone slightly higher, slightly lower? And are we cognizant of what's happening in the economy? A bit like Councillor Singleton's comment about inflation.
So perhaps I can try to answer that. So essentially, in simplistic terms, if you think about it, you might employ 2,500 people, and obviously every one of those roles will have a budget attached to it. And we've historically budgeted for 100% of that cost being incurred in the year. Now, obviously people during a financial year come and go, and there's a natural turnover in any organisation. So so this authority has historically budgeted for 100% of staff costs in the year. Some other authorities reflect the fact that there's a turnover rate, which means that they don't spend that 100% because people come and go during the year, and they therefore have a built-in turnover rate in their staffing budget, which reflects the fact that, you know, as I say, people come and go. So what we're stressing we're doing is we basically do that as part of our budget, and many other authorities do that. And 2% is a pretty conservative rate. I think actually our turnover rate has been a little bit higher than that. But what we wanted to do was to make sure we didn't. What we don't want to do is create a turnover rate that's unrealistic and therefore essentially puts a budget pressure in. It's more reflecting the reality of the fact that that's the turnover of the organisation, and we therefore think we can essentially build that underspend into the budget calculation for 22-23 onwards.
Okay, understand that. I think I mean, it's a big number, 1.3 million. I think the aligned budget in year 2 activity and business plan for investment in new lettings is £1 million, but that's self-explanatory. So could I just dwell on through the big figures on adults and council house building, which are adults, because these are big chunks of money, and they're savings in 22-23. They're not savings going forward after that. So budget rebase in line with reducing current purchase care costs. I mean, we touched on this before, but is there a bit more detail you can give us on that?
Thanks, Stu. I'm not going to be able to go into full detail, but I can ask colleagues responsible for that service area to provide more information behind this. But really, like you said, there are a number of big ticket items across the adults portfolio. Half of them, to a degree, are around looking at current activity levels on the service and then rolling forward future levels. And in areas we have identified that budget rebasing can happen, so that's taking the budget down in line with current placement costs, and that's a large part of the savings. So that is quite a sort of, it's a mechanical budget adjustment, but it is something that's backed with evidence in terms of in-year performance on social care. And then the other half of proposals are deep-rooted in long-standing social care transformation plans. So similarly to some of the emerging strategies on children's services, this is about ensuring that the best placements are aligned to individuals to try and ensure that we're not overusing out-of-area placements that quite often come at high cost, ensuring we're making best use of local provision, and also in some cases not over providing care. So we are encouraging independence and trying to reduce reliance on social care packages. And that's really integral in terms of a savings programme within adult social care. So it's around improving the service, but also releasing cashable savings.
Okay, all right. Right, just looking in the chat. Councillor Elliott, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that vacancy rate issue. I understand the answer to the question. It seems perfectly sensible to put in a percentage vacancy rate, but I think the question that Councillor Duguid asked was kind of, how does it compare to our vacancy rate I think you said 2% was conservative. Where is our vacancy rate usually, and are we seeing an upturn in vacancy rate at the moment? I mean, certainly know in the company I work for, we're seeing an awful lot of churn, particularly in more junior staff. Actually, we're seeing a lot of the churn rate going up, so the vacancy rate is higher than that. Yeah, just some clarity on where that compares, really.
So we can give you the specific detail. I mean, obviously turnover rates fluctuate year on year.
Yeah, sure.
But historically, our turnover rate has been more than 2% in a financial year. So that's why
sorry, turnover rate or vacancy rate? I mean, I would expect the staff turnover rate to be higher than 2%, but turnover rate doesn't exactly equate to vacancy rate, because it's about how long those posts then stay open for, isn't it?
So, yeah. So what I'm saying is the turnover rate then transforms into a saving against the 100% allocation saving cost, right? Sure. So historically, our turnover rate has translated into a saving rate that's more than that 2%.
Okay, thank you.
Budget. But again, we can give you some more background information about that in terms of how it's how it's actually flowed over the previous years.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'd be interested to see that. And just to follow up then, what does that mean that in previous years we've actually underspent on staffing budget? I mean, if we're now putting into the budget a 2% saving, that kind of implies that in previous years where we haven't included that 2% saving, we should have underspent. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Elliott. In a number of areas, we haven't spent 100% of the budgeted value, which is the key point I think Will made around. Okay. Quite often, if you budget 100%, cost isn't going to be 100%.
No, indeed. So actually, all we're doing is aligning the budget to reality.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hodge, were you happy, or did you have a supplementary?
It's just it's a new question about COVID contingency reserve. Yeah, so I just wanted to be clear. So this year we're going it alone. We don't have any COVID grant from the government for the first time, is my understanding, whereas last year we carried forward a bit, about 5 million. So with a COVID contingency reserve, so we had a sum of money last year put aside for that, about 5 million, and again we're putting that aside this year. Is that a base budget reserve? Is it a sum of money that we hold that is available, or is it it's not shown up in the figures of reserves we've got here? Because the reserves that we have transferring are filling a funding gap. So I just wanted to understand how that worked, and I know you have the plan for dealing with the ongoing COVID pressures. And then there was just one other kind of simpler question from the funding requirement table. Got some money in for new staff for human resources, 155,000 to deliver certain projects, and just interested in what those posts were and what they're delivering.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hodge. On the COVID contingency reserve, it's a combination. So in terms of financing that, it is one-off money, so it's not recurrent in our base. What it's utilising is a roll forward of our planned drawdown on the in-year COVID grant. So we're rolling some of that forwards, so that will be core funding. So we were kind of ring-fencing that as our pot to manage COVID risk next year, but also topping up from some of our financial planning reserves. So we're kind of carving out a contingency of one-off funding from retained grant and some other reserves. On the HR investment, it's a number of areas that are linked to our Director of Policy and People's kind of review and restructuring of the service. So I won't be able to give you specific detail in terms of how the money's being allocated within the structure, but I will take that one away as a question to give you some more information on.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
I think I can answer that. It is to employ a great deal of the investment is to employ a senior recruitment specialist, so we don't have to rely on external recruiters. So, that will help us in a number of areas. So I think that's the principal cost.
So it might be a cost saving in the long term if we're not employing external.
Well, Godfrey might want to say a bit about this, but when you recruit senior posts particularly, and you use agencies to do it, they normally charge you a fee based on a proportion of the salary, and it's not usually a small fee in my experience.
Yeah, I think it's also a reflection of the fact that we know we've got to, we'll be increasingly operating in a very competitive environment in terms of bringing really good people into the organisation, and we recognise we need more resource that is around specialist recruitment internally. So, you know, it's about putting that resource in within the organisation rather than bringing it in as and when we feel we've meant to before, which, as Councillor Simon said, often costs more money.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Singleton, with your background in recruitment, that makes sense to you, does it?
Yeah, it sounds entirely reasonable. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Totally good. Okay. Any other questions that we want to raise on the budget? Looks as if we're all done. Well, Councillor Hughes, I'll check with our regular chair and yourself about that minute requesting the cabinet. I'll make sure that we're all happy with it. But apart from that, Andy, Gary, thank you ever so much for the work that you've done on this. I know it's a Magnus opus at this time of year. So another thorough job in a very difficult climate and reconciling previous years to future years and this year, etc. So thanks ever so much for all the work you've done, for the way that professionally you've answered the questions and the one or two things that you'll get back to us on. So thanks again.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll pass on thanks to the rest of the finance team as well and colleagues, because it's been a huge amount of work. Yeah,
well done, and please do. Okay, well, that just leaves us to really look at the panel work plan. And I don't want to dwell on this as we sometimes do, because it's a fairly extensive programme we've got going forward. The one omission that's here that I keep on asking for and keeps on disappearing is Aquas and ADL. So I think we talked about this in the private session, and we may well have a private additional meeting in either late February or early March that we haven't got scheduled at the moment. We are actually required to look at Aquas ADL once every 6 months, and we haven't looked at it for a year. So we've got to make sure that happens, and maybe a private session would be the best way to address that. Does anyone else have any comments on the panel work plan, or will you leave that for us to discuss outside of the meeting? It's pretty extensive going forward. Okay, I think I'll take that as read. Right, well, I don't think we've got any other business. It's not down actually AOB as something, but I don't think we have any other business. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, the councillors, but also the officers, and the statement by Catherine Howells, which was, I thought, very succinct and to the point. So with that and further ado, thanks for watching, everybody, those that were, and I formally close the meeting.